So welcome everyone. This is our GPN speaker series, a monthly event hosted by us, the Global Possibility Network, which is an initiative based at the Penn Graduate School of Education. And Mike Nuckola is the director. I'm the associate director. And we also have Jackie Joyce, who's a senior research associate who's with us. Um, and thank you everyone else for coming here and joining us to listen to Professor Karcher, who will be talking to us today about the connection between mentoring and school connectedness. Before we hand it over to Professor Karcher, I'd like to just pass the mic to Mike for a few remarks. Thanks.
Thank you, Andrew, and thanks for being here, Michael. A couple of words about Michael Karcher. I'll only say a couple because the rest of the words I have to say about him wouldn't be appropriate for this call. So he and I go back a long time. Michael was actually one of my first doctoral students at Harvard many years ago and has since become one of the leaders in the field of mentoring research and the study of school connectedness. He's done a lot of creative work over time, and the implications of his work apply broadly. So we thought he'd be a good speaker for the GPN as people are looking at mentoring approaches globally now. And also, school connectedness has really come under fire in a lot of ways as young people are being progressively more challenged in school settings through stress and anxiety and structures of schooling. All sorts of things are making connectedness a harder road. Without further ado, I'll turn it over to Professor Karcher, one of the more creative scholars I've met in the mentoring field and in any field for that matter. Dr. Karcher.
Too kind, Mike, too kind. Well, I'm just so excited to be here with everybody today. I can't see really how many people we have.
We have 9 participants total.
Okay, all right. Well, Andrew, see, following your suggestion, um, I have about 10 or 15 slides to get us started that I hope
Hmm.
that I hope will get us just to about the half hour mark. And then
Hmm.
I tried to find this image this morning from a Far Side card um, of these couples, and they take the road less traveled. All the other couples go that way. So at that point, I want to propose, 4 talking points or different directions we could go, or we could open it up.
Great.
Um, I am sending materials in chat, most of which we don't need till we get to that fork in the road.
Okay.
Hopefully you'll receive those. So let
Great.
me
Yep.
upload or share
Hmm.
the presentation if I can. Share. There we go. Okay. I'm going to try to stay focused and not go down reminiscing lane. But I do have to say that Dennis, I was hoping to have a gathering of Mike and you and me here in South Texas this fall, but I got thrown off a little bit with the possibility of a knee replacement, which isn't going to happen. But I thought it might have spoiled our hiking trips. It's amazing to see these faces and to be able to talk about these concepts. Um, oh my, 35 years later, I'm a little stunned by this, actually. I'm gonna I want to approach the topic of connectedness and really stay focused on kind of an interesting use of a connectedness tool that I developed. But I've gone through a couple of iterations of this talk, one of which was chronological, but that doesn't really matter to most of you. Although it's an interesting unfolding. I want to try to keep it problem focused, although I'll hit those problems we might want to focus on toward the end of the slides. Let me start off by just saying what I think I have, where I think I've landed on where we are with connectedness as a construct, specifically school connectedness. In the last 30 years, school connectedness has really taken off as a popular construct, but right now I'm particularly concerned because it has approached the place that self-esteem was back when I first met Mike Nuckola in the 90s, where it had been what everybody was focusing on, and it became blurry and confusing. And then I think the death nail might have been reports suggesting that the folks with the highest self-esteem were usually incarcerated criminals. But that the term became so widely used and overused that it became useless, and we really all left it. I mean, that was really the thing we were pushing in the 90s. Let's get kids more self-esteem, but you almost never hear about it anymore. Um, for me, what's emerged in the literature is a real blurring where you've got um, studies referring to a variety of constructs, some of them falling into the belongingness camp. And there's a cluster of, I was going to create a pinwheel, sort of like the one I have in the back there, to sort of show the range of terms, but that cluster around belonging, that is a received experience of sort of feeling that you belong in the school, to what I will call connectedness as moving toward. For about a year now, I've been focusing on connectedness as engagement because that's another good word for it. But literally, it was just 2 days ago with my colleague Emma Tharp that we decided that the school engagement literature actually is its own beast, which is really focused on to what extent you engage in learning activities that are provided to you. And that really isn't what we're looking at. We're looking more at a social engagement. But engagement is more what I'm thinking is the alternative, belonging versus engagement, but I'm going to call it moving toward, and I'll sort of unpack that. These are related, as I've long suggested or proposed, and that's something that I want to pick up and talk about today. The idea that connectedness as moving toward others behaviorally and emotionally is a consequence typically of belonging, which is typically the result of support. And if there's a takeaway from my talk, it's that we will lose our footing and we will lose this construct if we can't more consistently and better differentiate what we mean. Connectedness as being supported, connectedness as feeling we belong, or connectedness as we are agentic and making decisions and moving forward, given the support and belonging that propels us. So I do have to sort of note that I'll come back to this. This work grows out of a paper that I read in 1990 or 91, either the page proofs or the actual publication by Selman and Nuckola on a paper called How People Treat Each Other. The citations on the bottom there. The scale I'm going to talk about comes out of a view, a lens about the importance of our connectedness in terms of interpretations of connectedness to the world over time. And so this talk takes us to how do we assess our connectedness and then reflect on it with kids and with adults to really tell a life story a little bit bigger and better. So since 2000, this has been my view of how connectedness as moving toward, connectedness as active engagement in places and activities and with people in those ecologically specific domains occurs and what informs it. And you can see what's a little funny. You can see that this is a serial model, and you might even say serial meditation. Serial mediation model. And I only use that fancy term because yesterday, as I was preparing the slides, I came across an article that unfortunately I couldn't get I actually couldn't get the article. I could get the title, and I could get the visual, the graphic, but I couldn't get the methods. And it cited the Hemingway, the measure I'm going to be talking about today, but I can't tell whether it used it or not. So I had to speculate, what do they mean? And so one of the options we have here is talking about their graphic and saying, what would it mean if they used measures of connectedness that were about belonging versus agentic moving toward others? How does that shift how we understand what this, and theirs is a serial mediation model. So that's one of the places we'll go to. But this is placed here right off the bat, just to highlight that for me, social support and connectedness are just, they're very distinct. Belonging is even distinct because you can provide social support and not someone doesn't experience belonging. You can also foster belonging, but not have them become agentic and actively engage. That's where I think opportunity development and possibility development comes in, and is something that I've been focusing on and becoming really interested in, that I'll talk about later. Specifically, the link between types of social support and their place within a web of larger support. And more specifically, how in the web of support, if you're familiar with that construct by John Zaff and Shannon Varga, in their web of support, at the periphery of the web, are these weak ties, which is a terrible name for them. They're weak because you don't see these people often, and they're not central to your daily life, or maybe even not even that important to you, but they seem to be the people who offer a bridge to other networks and to possibilities. So consistent with Putnam's work, it's it's those weak ties that are at the edge of your social network that actually offer you opportunities to link to other networks, grow your network. But for me, what's really important is that you must have the agency to take advantage of those opportunities and possibilities. And I've been intrigued, and I'll touch base on this maybe again, but I've really been intrigued by a chapter by Bronfenbrenner in a book, an edited book from 1990 by Fisher and colleagues. And it's the only place that I find this work. It's called The Ecology of Cognitive Development. And in it, Bronfenbrenner is talking about the intersection between individual characteristics and setting opportunities. And he talks about qualities, 4 different types of qualities that are developmentally sequenced that are about the person, that really contribute to whether they're able to or likely to take advantage of opportunities in the setting. So it's really important and really relevant. And the one that emerges in adolescence, and they're all actually very interesting, and they're highly related to Erikson's model, though he doesn't reference Erikson, is what is called, he calls directive beliefs, belief about your relationship to the world. And I believe that this is what the connectedness measure that I'll describe captures. It, and it is a belief about who I am in relation to the world and how the world will receive me, which is why you can see that on the bottom left of this diagram, your early attachments, I believe, and later attachments, attachments in adolescence, contribute to your sense of, if I make movement toward people, if I make movement towards peers, towards parents, towards anyone, whether in distress or out of curiosity, will they receive me? Will they support me? Right? Um, will they provide that secure base for me to launch into possibilities? So I like this definition by Townsend McWhirter, who I've worked with in the past, and they knew my work, but I don't know how well they knew my work before they had this quote. For them, they describe connectedness as when a person is actively involved with another person, object, group, or environment. And that involvement promotes a sense of comfort, well-being, and anxiety reduction. That just so nicely connects us with the attachment element of this, where connectedness is moving towards, in terms of like proximity seeking, like in attachment. When the child is distressed or anxious, they move toward the caregiver, and then once reassured, once that safe haven is experienced, then the parent becomes a secure base, and then they can explore. And that's the exploration and the seeking out, but it comes from within the individual. Okay, I'm going to put this very quickly. This is a fun, complex little picture here, but um, the scale that I'm about to describe was actually created because I couldn't find a measure of connectedness in 1995, 4, when I was developing a peer mentoring program in Austin. And I kind of threw this slide in because peer mentoring is what I ended up studying instead of peer counseling, which was the thing that I was trained in with Dennis and Mike at Harvard back in the 90s. That's what I thought I was going to study when I first started teaching at the University of Wisconsin. I did a RCT on peer counseling at the state hospital there, but there was so much interest in the peer mentoring. That's where my academic activity went, along with the connectedness work. But to develop this program, and I had this little slide on the bottom because the program was modeled after my experience at summer camp. So in 91, 92, no, 94, 95, I started working with St. Stephen's Schools, and we created this peer mentoring program that was trying to help these kids who were in a prep school outside of Austin become less sort of socially isolated from the community, become more connected to the larger world. And that led me to work with them to develop the Hemingway and conduct interviews with the mentors at this high school and asking them. And I'll come back to that in a moment. But that's the program where the Hemingway measure we'll talk about was created, and then that program was then replicated in Wisconsin when I got to Madison. That led to the peer mentoring program that I've been working on ever since. So out of this program in the top left, the Stevens kids, the Hemingway was born. The Hemingway is, to be honest, I can't quite remember because Gilligan was a little mesmerizing, but Carol Gilligan kind of wooed me and wooed many on the power of connection. And at the same time, her ideas paralleled the work by Knuckle, his ecological hermeneutic view of connectedness that was, I think, first articulated in that 1991 Handbook of Moral Development and Behavior chapter. Those two ideas, and then my interest in Jesser's theory of social bonding and risk taking, those came together to inform this ecological view. So when I was in Austin, and we needed this measure, we decided, well, we'll kind of create one. So let's figure out. I took Knuckles' concept, interpretations of connectedness to the world over time, and asked these kids, what are the worlds to which you feel connected and that are important to you? And what I love is that they identified 15 worlds of connectedness, ones that I hadn't even, there weren't anywhere in the literature at all. In fact, these kids identified, for example, a future self and a present self as targets of connectedness, which had to then get unpacked and defined. But those have become two of the most interesting scales on this measure. But they identified 15 worlds. One world that's also been fascinating is the world of reading. And these kids, many of them said that reading was a place they could go to literally in their mind to sort of escape the stressors around them. And I've continued to use this measure in a scale I'll talk about later, the retrospective measure, with adults. And it's impressive how many times people will say, yeah, reading was a world for me that I had control over and I could go to and that I enjoyed. And that was a safe place for me. And I just love that. So the measure was first identified, those 15 domains were identified, or 15 worlds. And then in my work as a grad student at UT Austin, and then in my first position at UT Madison, I ran EFAs over and over and over. I guess one funny thing that Dennis and Mike may or may not remember or know is that when we piloted the measure, at the time, connectedness, the writers of connectedness were largely Grodevant and Cooper, who'd been writing about parent connectedness between parents and children. And that definition of connectedness was heavily based on a social cognitive model that included sort of Kohlbergian and Selman-like perspective-taking qualities. So when I framed the items for this scale, I included items that were about behavior, that were about emotions, and that were about the capacity to take the other person's perspective, because that was really central to Grotevin and Cooper's family connectedness, parent connectedness measures from the late 80s and early 90s. But those measures of cognitive complexity in understanding one another's perspectives, they all dropped out. I just couldn't get those ever to stick. They didn't want to hold. And what ultimately emerged were a balance of items about being involved and caring for. And all the cognitive stuff went away, which is sort of funny. Okay, I got to just go to this. The main measurement paper came out 10 years later. And at the bottom of it, I give an attribution. You can see midway through, we ascribe the name Hemingway to Don Carli, a Michigan teacher and natural mentor who altered one student's career path when he said, "You write like Hemingway." I always get choked up whenever I say that. I just find that to be such a powerful story. And I believe that's a picture of Don Carli. I hate to say it took me 2 hours to find it. There's a picture behind you, see a little seashore? There's another guy from Michigan named Don Carli who died in July, and he looked like a Youper. So I thought that was the guy. And
I
only
think
later,
this is
huh?
I think this is the real Don Carli, Michael. But
Yeah.
you have to, if you're going to tell that story, you have to tell the second part of it, which is, and then eventually I realized Don Carli meant you write in short sentences.
What is it? But whatever gets you out of bed in the morning. That's funny. Well, I actually found it extremely hard to find a picture of him. It took me over an hour yesterday to locate this picture. But I find it so powerful, and I was when I was reflecting on this, I was thinking about the about possibility development and Bandura's, I want to say 1990 article or 1992, The Psychology of Chance Encounters. There are these moments that change lives, that stick with us, that but you got to be there. You have to be in relationship and be moving forward to come across these moments. I attribute my professor life to work with Mike and how he responded to my writing and my work. And then I have, a few students whose life trajectories have changed by the chance encounters. But they were all students who were moving and agentic and were able to sort of meet me. They weren't folks I grabbed and pulled and said, "You're going to be a professor." So I think this intersection of opportunity and agency is really critical. So let me jump to some of the items just to give you a kind of a sample. Um, and you may find that these aren't exactly what I say, but in general, across the 15 domains, there's 6 scales, 6 items per scale on most scales. They are typically a balance of 3 behavioral movement toward and 3 attitudinal or affective. So moving toward friends or moving toward school or moving toward parents behaviorally and emotionally, positively and emotionally. So in the school one, if you focus on the bottom right, um, I feel good about myself at school. Doing well at school is important to me. I enjoy being at school. There's the affective piece. I work hard at school. I get bored at school. Doing well at school. These are about the kids' activity. So they're a little bit about what you might have called school liking. Um, but these aren't about climate, and they're not about feeling you belong, and they're not about feeling supported. They are really, these items are housed in the person situated in that setting or in those relationships. Before I move past this, let me just mention that in the chat, you should be able to find these slides if you want to peek at them. But before I move on, any questions about the items? Because the next thing I'm going to move to is how these are scored and how they're used in the connectedness profile interview.
Michael, just one quick question. Have the items remained the same since the early days of the instrument?
You know, they have, and I'll tell you, I have a paper I'm working on. I think I'm gonna get submitted this week. I've been working on it for 12 years. It's a college connectedness scale. And the reason I've been working on it for 12, actually 15 years, is that my colleagues who collected the data decided to throw in some of their own items and change the wording of some of the items at the last minute. And I was so pissed off by that. Um, I refused to kind of participate in the publication of the prior papers, but I thought I got to make this work. But for the adolescent scale, I've never changed the items, and I haven't found that they needed to be changed. And this is,
Mhm.
I actually won't go into the ad health scale much. I meant to pull some slides together, but let me. One of the things we would talk about later is the most used measure of school connectedness in the literature, or most reported, is the ad health school connectedness measure. Now, that was a measure that was pulled together at one point for one study by Bloom and I'm blanking on the other author's name. And they had 8 items. My One of my students and that we've been working on a paper, which is the evolution of the Franken scale, which is the ad health scale. Because if you look at the literature, that scale, which had 8 items, has had the items pulled out, um, numerous items pulled out repeatedly based on the sample. So even if they use the ad health scale, you don't know that it's the same scale that was used in other studies. And then that scale has also been, they plucked out items, they've renamed it. So there are now, I think it's 14 distinct measures with the same somewhat related pool of items.
Mm.
And I find it to just be horrible. Sometimes they go, yeah,
Michael, just one question related to what you just said. Is it's college connectedness? Is that what you said?
yeah.
Is that for active college students, or can it be used by adolescents not yet in college who feel connected to college aspirations?
So I had a college connectedness measure that was a just direct translation of these scales of
Hmm.
these items. That's what got tweaked and adapted last minute by my statistician friend. He's still one of my good best friends here. Um, but the one that we have now is includes connectedness to professors, connectedness to advisors, and connectedness to college.
Got it.
Um,
Yeah.
and they are slightly different. But I have what I was able to do finally to have some sort of rapprochement with this scale was I took out the items that they added. And the thing that they added that really frustrated me was items like, I feel no sense of connection at school, or I feel connected to my professors. I feel connected. That no, even worse, items like I have no sense of connection with my advisors. Well, what is a sense of connection? They get so unclear. So ultimately, I just dropped those and redid the factor analyses and found, wow, those didn't add anything other than
Hmm.
just adding more items, which always sort of makes the reliability go up. So once we were able to drop those and whittle it down to just behavioral and attitudinal, they hold and they're useful and they predict persistence. That's what's kind of crazy. They actually and that
Right.
and the paper we have also has this sort of sequential, the connectedness to advisors and to professors. The effect of it on retention is fully mediated by the larger connectedness to college as a broad
Huh.
construct.
Fantastic. Thanks,
Yeah.
Michael.
Okay.
Michael, I'm
Yes.
on those questions. I'm wondering, I feel like recently there's been a lot more attention to broadening these discussions of parents to family more generally.
Yeah.
And I know there is, anyway, I'm sure in psychology there is some fraught nature to that, but thinking about folks who have strong relationships with grandparents who are raising them or even foster, how do you think that language in that
Mm,
parents category would be complicated by changing that specific word parents?
thank you. Is it Kimi? Kemi.
Yes, Kemi.
Kemi. Kemi, that's actually a great question. And it's one I'm completely on board with. So I've had this come up and I see no um, I see no reason not to put my caregiver um, in there in lieu of parent or parents. Um, there is this parent scale, which could be caregivers. There's also, I should mention this, there's a short and a long version. The short version has 10 of the 15 scales, and the long version has 5 other scales that I've learned over the years schools get antsy about. Connectedness to culturally different peers, connectedness to religion, connectedness to romantic partner. There's always some schools always got a problem with one of those three, and connectedness to father, connectedness to mother. And that further complicates things, but it is extraordinarily rich data. But for some reason, if you ask kids to comment about their parents, the parents don't get upset. But if you ask them to comment or respond about their mother or their father, they get anxious or concerned. So there's the safe version, which is just the first 10 scales that includes parents. And I would be fine to change that to primary caregiver. I have no problem with that. Some people have done that. I haven't like looked at done any work to see if it changes things. I don't think it should or would. Do you?
I don't think so. I'm not quite sure in terms of this psychological conception. Like maybe there is a difference for folks who, for some reason, have been separated from having their parents as a primary caregiver. I can
Yeah.
imagine there's some correlates having to do with stability or income. So I could imagine maybe some change, but probably not consequential enough to justify not having that more inclusive language.
Yeah. Let me jump out of sequence a few slides to share an example I probably would share. This interview the connectedness profile interview, I've been using it in my peer mentoring program. In fact, I've dropped in there the pages from my program manual or the curriculum that are the activity itself. I remember one of the first kids in Wisconsin when we did this activity. I asked them to talk about or tell a story or try to explain why they're higher than their peers in a different in some world of connectedness and why they're lower. And I guess because I'm getting old, I get choked up a lot. So I'll probably get choked up on this. But um, this boy who was a mentor, was he mentor or was he mentee? I can't. Oh, I think he might have been a mentee. So he'd be a middle schooler. He was lower on connectedness to father than on connectedness to mother. Well, he was lower than his peers on connectedness to father. And that really upset him because he said, I love my father. This is bullshit. This isn't who I am. And I'm not lowering anybody else. I love my dad as much as anybody here. And I said, yeah, that makes sense. These questions about connectedness to father, really, they're not really about love. They're about the amount of time spent. Is there a reason to understand why you might be lower on time spent? Because you say the other ones are about how much you care about them, but half the items are about time spent. And he said, well, my dad's in prison, so I don't see him very much. And it was just so powerful to see that in that case, and I love that one, being lower than your peers doesn't mean you care for them less. It means that your experience is different from theirs. And knowing about you that you don't see your dad very often because he's in prison in a different state is a really important piece of who you are that may never come up in the mentoring or take a long time. And there's so many stories that this connectedness profile interview reveals that don't come up in mentoring otherwise, that I think it's worth that risk. But even that kid was able to get it and appreciate it, and I think feel seen and heard, you know? So
Thank you so much.
yeah. Okay. So what do we do for this connectedness, this interview? Well, oh, I meant to drop this. I can drop this in the chat, or I can mail it to you. But there's a Excel file that my student, the first name of their Joe Avra, created for me 10 years ago. And with this Excel file, you have the kids complete the survey, and then you have to enter it, into this Excel file with the scores starting on I, right? They go across. So whether it's the 55 items for the 10 item scale or 10 scale measure, or the 75 items for the full Monty, you enter those, and then on the next tab, it gives you their scores. You see down here below, I don't dare. Down here below, you can see the scores for both the group and for individuals. Here we got the scores for Bill Clinton and for me. Did you see what I mean? So you can enter those scores, and on the first page, here are those people. On tab 1, you enter their raw data, and then on tab 2, you get these scores for you. Because one of the things I found so funny, I had this scale I was giving talks on in Wisconsin in 2000, 2005, and I started to get contacted by teachers and counselors, and they'd say, well, I got these scores. What do I do with them? And then I'm like, okay, we got to scale them. So they'd send them to me, and I'd put them in SPSS and reverse code, reverse item, and then create the scales and send it back. But then they'd say, well, now what do I do with them? I mean, what does a 3.8 mean? Or what does a 2.8 mean? And I thought, well, damn, that's the kind of question you don't get if you're just doing research studies and reporting numbers in tables. So it became clear to me we had to get a way to interpret this. Well, a good way to interpret it is to take those scores and compare them to the group mean. So that up here, you see the top line is the group scores, and those are put in this chart. That makes sense? They're plotted in their own. Now, what you're going to see on the next slide is that a line, these things are going to form a line that looks like this. And that line gets placed behind the individual scores. So here's that red line. Now, what we have here is a kid, oops, well, you see the gaps here, and you see the line. The red is the group average, and the purple is the individual scores. So what you see when you get this profile, and then there's it's got a little pull down up here on top. So every time you put a different person and from the pull down, you get this different sheet, and then you print it out, and it's got their scores on all the scales. This is the 10 item because it doesn't. Oh, that's not right. That's the full. Yeah, that's the full 15 score. So here we've got someone who's higher than their peers. Here you got somebody who's lower, lower, a little higher. You see the gap there? And of course, it doesn't really matter for our purposes whether it's, I'm not even gonna say statistically significant, but whether it's even a standard deviation higher or lower. It's just a relative, and it's to draw our attention. Let's think about, let's ask a question about the self in the present. Self in the present is how you feel viewed by your peers and others in terms of your abilities, traits, and likability. Or here we have a low score on connectedness to mother, but not on father. So the question, like, first thing that I like to ask kids is just when you see that, what memory or thought or story comes to mind? And then that usually is sufficient. But if that doesn't trigger something that's a worthwhile or interesting story, then there are a list of prompts that are reflective of the specific items so that we can say, well, is there any reason you might be disagreeing more with your mom than other kids? Because that's one of the items. So that way, that way the scale interpretation remains accurate, right? We wouldn't want to say, well, do you see any reason why you don't love your mom as much as others? That'd be terrible because that's not what the scale measures, right?
Hey, Mike.
Yeah.
Hey, so what you were just talking about sounds like, something you'd have a discussion like in relationship between, I don't know if you're talking about like a mentor and a kid or a researcher and a kid.
Yeah.
So it sounds like this is a tool for those kinds of conversations to more deeply understand what the young person's sense of connectedness is about, right?
Yeah.
I'm wondering because, well, you may realize like I've spent a lot of time thinking about evaluation, and you mentioned on a previous slide, that this is useful for evaluation. Um, do you do you use it to evaluate your mentor program? And B, how do you think about what hypotheses would you have on each of these dimensions? Like, would you expect mentoring to support all of them? Would you pick certain ones that you think would go up due to mentoring?
Good
Um,
point.
those kinds of things coming up for me. And then last thing is that I wondered how important the connectedness to the mentor is, and I don't know if you have one of those dimensions as part of your measure.
Um, Last question first. I created a connectedness to mentor scale, trying to use cohesion theory of self-psychology that I like, but it's not great. I think Mike's scale, the MCQ that measures relationship quality and other characteristics, is like better, so I defer to that. But to your question, I hadn't mentioned this. Like I know exactly what you're saying, and I personally believe we really need to have outcomes that are linked logically to activities. So in my peer mentoring program, we have a curriculum. So in the program, there's a program manual, then there's a curriculum, then there's a training guide to train on how to do the curriculum. Then there's a mentor handbook, and the curriculum of activities covers the 15 worlds of self, other, and society across the year. So we do activities that specifically target, for example, connectedness to reading and connectedness to teachers. We do a teacher interview where they go interview teacher and then do a presentation on the teacher. And like, for example, um, spending time with and liking teachers, I can see as a logical increase as a function of this program where you're actually both interviewing a teacher and getting to know them, and you're hearing other people tell cool stories about teachers. You know what I mean? So for me, it's not mentoring that's undefined. That's actually activity-based mentoring because it's these high school kids working with middle school kids. So I do expect to see an influence on all of these. Um, and we actually we I don't think our connectedness to parents actually I'm drawing a blank on what activities do we have on connectedness to parents, but I remember in the evaluation connectedness to self in the present, self in the future, connectedness to reading, and connectedness to parents are the ones that pop up regularly. And when I first saw the connectedness to parents, I actually we're still working in the program, and I was able to talk with some parents and ask, why do you think this might be? And again, I'm going to get all choked up, but um, this was the program in Austin, and these parents would drive their kids or walk their kids to the bus station and wait for the bus to come pick them up from across town to bring them to the St. Stephen's School to do the program. It was all day on a Saturday, and they said that the conversations that they had, both walking to the bus stop and walking home, and then any subsequent conversation during the week about the program with their middle school age kid, I heard multiple parents say it was one of the few times that they had conversations with their kid that wasn't about complaining about what they weren't doing right or wearing right or doing their chores. It was toxic free conversation that both of them made them feel more connected, and I guess made them probably in retrospect feel like they argued less with their parents because they're talking more non-combative. You know what I mean? So that was an ancillary one that I hadn't anticipated, and I wouldn't attribute to the curriculum. It turns out to have been, it creates these little pockets of uncontaminated interactions that are kind of cool.
Love hearing that. Thanks.
Thanks for those
Michael, you got
questions.
another hand out there.
Oh, Liza?
Yes, hi. Thanks so
Hi.
much. And I just wanted to kind of extend that last question because I'm also so interested in kind of the applicability, of the research in life, and you mentioned the logic behind, you know, the connectivity between the activity and the outcomes. So my question is it a precondition? You just noted that it might not be, that the mentoring program is designed around the dimensions here for that kind of packaging, you know, to feel like that evaluation is legitimate, or to feel that it is the right kind of framing of that when it's a real research-based curriculum, or does that apply to mentoring programs writ large? You know, how generally would it? Yeah.
So that's a great question.
Sarah.
So I did a large scale study, randomized trial with communities and schools, and their school-based mentoring program that doesn't use a curriculum. And I was young and lazy and ambitious, and I included all the connectedness scales. In hindsight, I shouldn't have, because I should have thought more carefully. But actually, it was a grant and I got it. I was like shocked that I got it, and we had to roll the data out quickly. And I didn't think all that at much ahead about which outcomes can we expect. In fact, I didn't really even know the program well. I think that's an issue that evaluators often have. But with with new RCT trial registry activities, you would have to really select and think through, what am I likely to impact and not, because they're going to get included in my tests and I'm going to lose power if I throw in a bunch of stuff. So I would not assume, for example, with the communities and schools, it's a school-based program that mentors go to the school. So we didn't see any change in connectedness to parents, father or mother in that program. And that makes sense. And yet we included the scales in the evaluation, which was not a great thing to do, because after the fact we go, well, of course you wouldn't expect anything there. I think a program should think, what are we likely to influence? Connectedness to friends, like Cavell's got that program where they meet with other kids in the school while they do their mentoring, the Lunch Buddy program. I would expect connectedness to friends and self in the present would be influenced in that program, and probably connectedness to school and actually not friends, connectedness to peers. That's the classmates. And I would actually expect also a positive influence on connectedness to teachers, because it tends to, positive experience with a mentor tends to improve connectedness to teachers, regardless of whether the teachers are interacting with more. But family, romantic partner, religion, neighborhood, no, I wouldn't expect those to change at all directly as a function of that kind of mentoring program. And I think there's another program I'm working with communities and schools. It's a school workplace mentoring program. And in that one, it's all about focusing on the future. So I would expect kids to have higher scores on self in the future, because that scale is a lot about, in terms of moving toward, have you thought about and how hopeful are you about your future, yourself in the future. And if we're meeting with a mentor and talking about careers, and you would expect that would increase. Or actually the items include, I spend time thinking about my future. I do activities that'll help me in the future. So that behavioral element helps you link. If they're doing those activities, the scale should go up, because that's what it's measuring, specifically engagement plus positive affect. That's a great question. Did I understand the question correctly, Liza?
You did, and kind of a follow-up would be just to think on, would you advocate for differently designed mentorship programming by, organizations like communities and schools that kind of hit on particular aspects, dimensions differently, or with more robustness, or,
Yeah. Well, jumping the gun a little bit, one of the options for a conversation is um, to talk a little bit about how the belonging, the support, belonging, connectedness sequence can be really can be unpacked and utilized strategically in mentoring. Mike Nuckola and I organized a framework called the team framework that looks specifically at what makes matches successful, given the contributions of the kids, who they are developmentally, situationally, what kinds of activities facilitate that? Is it supportive or is it directive? And is it around adult goals or youth goals? And to what extent are they teaming up on this? It's called the team framework. I've been working for the last couple of years with John Zaff on how we think about the team framework, um, specific kids, but over the course of the year. And to answer your question, yes, I do think programs need to do this more, whether they're adults with teenagers, whether they're in the community or in schools. We have a 3-sequence sort of a curriculum where the first uses the web of support assessment for the mentor to learn where is the kid getting support? Where are they getting resources, emotional support? Where are they getting appraisal? Like Mike got appraisal from Don Carli, where are they getting these forms of support across the cores of family, school, and friends world or neighborhood? And then we do the connectedness interview about 2 months later. Where are you investing yourself emotionally and behaviorally? Usually, the usually it maps on pretty directly with where you're getting support, but sometimes it doesn't. Um, and that really opens up a world of like, wow. And it also offers opportunities to think, well, what are some possibilities? And if we look at the web of support, we can say, well, how, if you want to do this stuff in the future, if you're not thinking about your future, or if you are thinking about your future, who in your web of support on the periphery might be able to link you with somebody? And then the last part of the curriculum is looking at developmental relationships and saying, how can you create and invite and build the kind of developmental relationships that are going to help you get where you want to go? And I do think that kind of stuff is important um, in general mentoring. I have a training or a little activity that I use on the flip side, but it's relevant. I do a training for the mentors on something I call drop the prop. And that is explicitly to train the mentors to know when to get rid of the activity, get rid of the curriculum and be present, like when to follow their lead, when to collaborate, it's almost always better for them to focus on something that they want to work on than the curriculum. But the curriculum is like almost essential, especially for young high school boys who don't know what to do or how to have conversations. But at any chance they can drop that prop and go deeper, they should. So in unstructured mentoring, I think they also need props to give them some mentor self-efficacy. Isn't that one of your scales, Mike? Mentor self-efficacy?
It is, yeah.
Yeah. And one of my favorite of your scales, Michael, is the support seeking. I think if
I learned that from you, Michael.
well, it's your scale, bro, and it is amazing. It is so important. I have a great study of this workplace mentoring, and like one of the biggest factors predicting whether the mentors plan to stay is this mentee support seeking. Like the mentor's view of the degree to which the mentee is seeking them out. But that's a dance. That's an interactive. The mentors we can train mentees, but we can also train mentors. But this ways that mentors can help kids feel seen and heard and partnered with are what we really need to be training mentors and mentees to get to that piece. So yeah, I do think most mentors need more structure, more tools, more guidance, as well as training on how to drop the prop and collaborate and partner with that kid whenever possible.
Michael, if I can just say one quick thing about what you're addressing. One of the things that I found really interesting in some of your early work with mentees was actually helping mentees understand their importance to mentors and how they can respond to their mentors to help the mentors understand they're really having an impact and doing something meaningful. Found that to be really unique in the field, and it's something I've thought a little bit about, but we haven't done great in our work on possibility mentoring. We haven't done great work on that, but I think it's such a compelling idea.
This that that reciprocal there's a lot of folks who've talked about that. I think even Spencer really kind of captured some of this. If especially with teenagers, if they don't feel like they're contributing and giving back and having an influence, um, they're not that into it. But
Right.
your point is the especially the younger ones, they need they need to, well, they need to know, the mentors need to know that the mentees find them important and valuable
Right.
and are glad they're there. Is that, I think I got thrown off a little bit by thinking about Spencer's work. But yeah, I think that reciprocity is really, really critical, especially once you're mentoring high schoolers.
Hmm. Yeah.
Okay, so believe it or not, we're actually at the point where we've talked about this, where we could go several different directions. Maybe what I should do, and I have slides to illustrate each, but I'll just tell you kind of as a concluding where I'm going, and then we can have a conversation that leads from this. So I really like the retrospective assessment, because the retrospective assessment I like to use with adult mentors with who are working with teenagers. In my teen mentoring program, the teenagers complete the the regular adolescent connectedness scale and profile, and they interview each other because I found, and this is important, if the mentors don't ever get interviewed themselves and have to understand and view why their lows and highs are not good and bad, they are just texture to who they are. If they don't get that, they tend to do the connectedness profile interview with kids assuming low means negative, but they're much less likely to do that if they've actually been interviewed themselves. So we do in the program, the mentors interview each other to practice before they do it with the kid. With adults, the retrospective Hemingway has the adult think back when you were in ninth grade, and then you answer the questions. And so one of the things we have here is a correlation table in case people were kind of nerdy like that, to look at some of the correlations for adults between their adolescent ninth grade connectedness and both their adult attachment styles and their adult defense use. And their adolescent connectedness is, particularly on the self scales, is predictive of use of more mature defenses in adulthood. Interestingly, connectedness to reading, at least in this data set, is negatively correlated with uh, adult attachment security, but it's positively correlated with the use of mature defenses. So I think in some ways the reading is an interesting one. In some ways it can be a lifesaver for folks, but it also pulls them out of relationship to some extent. And if it does so excessively, it can have a negative consequence, I believe. So the retrospective scale is something I find very interesting. And then I've already mentioned the second one, which is kind of unpacking the support, belonging, connectedness pathway. I have a great quote from Andrew's work about the autonomy support distinction in working with kids in schools around careers. What I'm kind of really fascinated about right now and hope to get knocked out soon is this we call the jingle jangle jungle. Jingle jangle is the problem where you have two constructs that share the same name, or where you have the same construct given multiple names. So in the ad health, for example, you've got all these different versions of the ad health scale with different names, but they're the same hodgepodge of items. And in the broader field, we have, I always get these mixed up. I think it's the jangle problem where we're measuring different things. Literally, people are using the Goodnow's belongingness scale just as frequently and calling it school connectedness because school connectedness is a hot topic. Well, poor Goodnow, that's a great scale to measure belongingness. So when we slap on the term connectedness to it, we've not done the field a service. So those things are really important. It's that one article that has this graphic. I can't wait to find out what actually they're measuring, to sort of see, wow, what were they assessing for connectedness? And then the last one, and this is one that kept me up last night, and I'll probably conclude with this. And we should have a conversation about this, Mike, but in some ways, the world has changed in the last 30 years. I don't like to admit it, but my clothes aren't well received. My jokes aren't understood. But worse, um, the connectedness scale was a great predictor of risk taking for adolescents. I'm going to say up until 2010. But with the emergence of smartphones and internet access, time spent with others, time spent engaging with other people, the meaning of that has changed. And now the risks aren't, are you doing drugs? Are you driving recklessly? Are you having sex? Are you pulling away from folks? Are you isolating? Are you avoiding anxious situations? So all of a sudden, the use of the scales and their interpretation is a little bit mind-boggling. And I've been trying to unpack that and what it means, where risk-taking behavior isn't now what we used to think it was. And so what does it mean to feel positively toward and spend time with all these folks in all these ecologies or not? Because it used to be if you spent less time in the neighborhood and with friends, you would be drinking less, drugging less, and getting in less trouble. But now, if you're spending less time in the neighborhood and less time with friends, you're likely self-isolating in ways that are fostering anxiety, isolation, and hindering you. So some scales have, I think, I need to test this out, almost the opposite interpretation because the damn world changed when I wasn't looking.
So interesting. And I think so accurate. Michael, we got about 5 minutes left. How do you want to use it? Or Andrew, how do you want to use it?
Sure. Thanks. Well, I mean, there's so much here.
I'm sorry, we have about 10 minutes left. I
Yeah.
read that wrong.
But I feel like I've just had a very hearty meal. And I'm I'm stuffed. But it's there's so much great thinking and analysis and creativity here. It's just I don't know about you guys, but my head is buzzing. So thank you, Professor Karcher, for just a incredible presentation. So much to think about and talk about. Um, with that, I won't use up much more time, but I will just open the floor to everyone for questions. And I would like to ask if anyone would like to jump in with a question who hasn't already asked a question. Okay, well, I will sort. Sorry.
I was going to call on someone, Andrew, if you, I am really curious what Jackie's thinking about with respect to this conversation because she's actively
Yeah.
working with these constructs. So, Jackie.
Thank you, Dr. Nakula. And thank you, Dr. Karcher, for this really fascinating presentation. Dr. Nakula and I have been working on a college and career initiative together with the Academy at Penn, where we actually administered the Hemingway
Oh, you do?
to a cohort of 50 rising 10th graders. And so my background is in college and career readiness and supporting students through not only the application process, but in retention. And I've been thinking a lot about my brain's all over the place. My brain's all over the place. So I don't necessarily have a question, but
Becky, could I invite you to a later conversation?
Oh, I would love that.
I was so upset with Mike Knuckle when I learned at the end of the summer, after beating my head trying to do college advising with my rising senior, that this bastard has a whole program and curriculum on it. If I'd known that, I could have freed myself this summer, signed him up for your program, and enjoyed myself. But I'd love to learn more about what y'all are doing because it looks really exciting. I found it, on your webpage.
Oh,
Yeah.
absolutely. I mean, I actually I was doing college access work in West Philadelphia when I came across Dr. Knuckles' work in possibility development. And I was always passionate about seeing this need for earlier intervention, but I didn't think that disseminating information was enough. And so possibility development gave language to this need for students to have the time and space to process what their interests are and helping them actualize how they can make their possibilities feel more tangible. And I think mentorship is a key role in that. So I went to Penn with the vision
Oh,
of
wow.
building like working with Dr. Nuckola to build possibility development in this college and career readiness context, seeing the very clear connection. So
wow. Well, I would love to have a conversation with you to hear more and to talk about the connectedness assessment if that's of interest.
absolutely, absolutely.
I do have a burning question. It has risen to the surface. Um, so my background is in anthropology, so I'm interested in the idea of belonging as an
Mm,
anthropological term. Um, but there's an obvious psychological component to that. But I think one good question would be belonging to what? And that is a cultural question because it's about shared values, agreement on shared norms, right? So, but what I really like about sort of in the beginning of the presentation is that um, you're you're kind of walking us through a process of the psychological, the sociological, the anthropological, right? The individual, how they're making decisions more or less on their own, but people are always social, right? But there's sort of like a movement from, in some ways, the private to the public,
mm,
um, expressing some desires, expressing some preferences, moving toward people, right?
mm-hmm.
Um, and so sociological is a little more abstract. It's about groups and the individual in the group, membership, those kinds of things, participation. But, anthropological terms of art, you're talking about culture and shared norms and values.
Yeah.
There's a term that I coined a few years back to talk about reciprocity
Mm,
and the role of culture in reciprocity.
mm,
Um, how how in groups work on sort of unspoken norms of reciprocity, how one in group might be culturally different than another, how culture can sort of unconsciously shape norms around reciprocity, and how these kinds of reciprocity, there's cultural variation, but there's a lot of cultural universality as well. In other words, all in groups kind of do this. It's sort of a normal thing that people do. It's kind of, and I would say kind of a value neutral thing. Um, so anyway, those are just some thoughts that are bubbling up. Nothing really there in terms of a focused
oh,
question, but
can I
yeah.
share with you? There was a New York Times article this summer that actually referenced an earlier New York Times article. It was about a woman, businesswoman who moved to Dubai, African American woman living in Dubai. And I was reading through it because it was about, where are people going and what's the economy doing and all that. But then it got to a place where she was talking about her experience there and whether she was going to come back to the States or stay there. And she said this line that something like, the future is less about belonging and more about participating.
Hmm.
And she was kind of basically saying, when you're here, um, if you need to belong and feel like you're one of the the folks here, you're going to miss the boat. What we all need to do here is simply be present and be in relationship. And that was
Hmm.
like, I thought like that for me was the connectedness thing. And she was basically saying, and I think so it generalizes, in a mobile society where you're often entering communities that have been longstanding before you got there.
Hmm.
If what you need to feel agentic is belonging, you may be behind, you may be in trouble. But if you
Hmm.
have directive beliefs, to use Bronfenbrenner's term, that have you moving toward others and being open to caring for others and being open to spending time with others, you're going to do well in this world that shifts as much as it is. So I love that line. If I wrote more, I'd put it as the title of an article. The future is less about belonging and more about participating.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's something deeply anthropological and psychological,
Mm-hmm.
and time-based about that point. That
For
kind of
sure.
it doesn't get to the reciprocity piece, except maybe if you expect a certain type of reciprocity that you would
Right.
expect to receive at home in order to feel belonging or feel invited to participate, you may lose out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, I love that example, and I can't help but think of, the sort of German idealist tradition of hermeneutics and phenomenology, and thinking about horizons and universality and particularism. I mean, this is kind of like my happy place in terms of analysis of these kinds of things, because I'm just so interested in what is, you know, what kind of what kind of cultural psychological universal, and which is connected to morality, is that person basing their participation on. They have to have some kind of framework. Charles Taylor talks about a minimal moral framework. What kind of moral framework is kind of running in the background that's guiding their participation? Then you have psychological terms like emotional intelligence. Uh, is are is that cross-culturally valid, right? Are they able to, being able to read cultural cues and distill those into psychological sort of working principles, right?
Yep.
Some people might be just more adept at that. Is that trainable, right? So,
Those sources of the self,
indeed.
they keep changing and rearranging.
Hey, folks, we are at the 12:16 mark. I know we need to wrap up. People need to get to other business, but Michael, thank you so much for this. I wish more of my students could have come. We have many students involved in mentoring work, and they would benefit from this, but it's recorded and it will be shared widely. So once we get feedback from this, I'll use it in our mentor prep program this year. The possibility mentoring work we do is very much about connectedness to the future, self in the future,
Yeah.
with the assumption that adolescents, among other forms of connectedness, really need to have an authentic connection to some type of future in order to move forward productively. Otherwise, they're just carried into the future by default, kind of automatically. And that can come with many consequences. So I'll be in touch, but this couldn't have been better. What wonderful presentation. And even though you had to show those pictures of the past, which I couldn't stop thinking of anything else once I saw those. But I appreciated it, and I'm glad
Thank
you
you all.
withheld the rest.
Thank you
So
all so much.
yeah, thank you, everybody.
Good luck with
We'll be
that
back.
Thank
meeting.
We'll be
you,
in touch soon.
Professor
Take
Karcher, and
care.
everyone for coming.
Thank you.
Great to see you.
You too.